And start with Luther and the Reformation. Now, for Luther, the Exodus story loomed large. He may not have called himself Moses, though I have the sense he probably would have given the opportunity. But he was certainly happy to refer to the Pope and to papists as Pharaoh in Egypt, as you can see from this quote here, where he's talking about Catholics and what he would call papists. Again, saying it's possible to make a mistake through ignorance, but I've taught them. Right, I've said the things, and they are hardened. Right, if he be hardened and not yield to the truth, like Pharaoh, who would not acknowledge his sins or humble himself before God. So he's anticipating the destruction of the papacy and the Catholic Church, and very clearly identifying this with identifying them with Pharaoh in Egypt, which again, he may not be saying it out loud, but that does leave him effectively as Moses here. Now, of course, given that Luther was also, a rabid anti-Semite, his feelings about Moses were, shall we say, somewhat mixed. Here's a quote where he compares Moses to the Pope, which again is a totally unsurprising development. The equation of Judaism and Catholicism is a really long-standing one that lasted within the Reformation and lasted certainly all the way down into 19th, I would say even 20th century biblical scholarship as a sort of standard ploy. So that's Luther. Calvin, for his part, also used Moses in his calls for reform. Calvin was a big Moses fan. Moses' style of leadership, Calvin took as a model. So here's Calvin talking about sort of separations of power. He's saying, right, Moses could speak only what God told him. And so too, ecclesiastical power, that is the power of the church and the Pope, should not go beyond its bounds of what it's granted from God, but should be confined within certain limits. And here's Moses, who never said anything to anyone that God didn't tell him to. That's how the Pope ought to be. So Moses was a model of a sort of ecclesial leadership, but more than that for Calvin. For Calvin personally, Moses was a leader, a model for a number of reasons. In part because of his failure to actually accomplish the thing. But my favorite part of this is Calvin insisted that when he died, he be buried in an unmarked tomb, just as Moses had been buried in an unmarked and unknown grave. I'll add that Calvin has this wonderful, really marvelous commentaries on biblical books, including Exodus, where he's going through and often is just explaining what he thinks the text means and what the moral lessons we should get from it are. And sometimes he breaks out and sort of says, like, okay, this is just like Catholics. This is just like the church. So when he's going through the Exodus story, he gets the part where Pharaoh says to Moses, why should I listen to you? Who is Yahweh? Right? I don't know this God. And Calvin says, we may remark a like madness in all idolaters. The cry of the papists nowadays is that we're imposing a new God on the world. So, direct one-to-one correspondence, right? Just like it was then, Pharaoh, it's just like papists today. And similarly, when Pharaoh calls for his magicians to contest with Aaron and Moses, Calvin says, and how many nowadays among the papists are followers of wicked superstitions under the pretext of simplicity? It's like he just can't help himself. What we see in both Luther and Calvin, and we'll continue to see, is the identification of themselves and their group as the oppressed Israel, and their opponents, the dominant religious forces in their society, as the new Pharaoh. And that's, again, following who identifies as Israel and who they identify as Pharaoh is kind of the fun game here.